The glass of sangria glowed under the chandelier, its ruby hue masking a sinister secret. At Susan's lavish birthday dinner in their Boulder mansion, Gavin Brooks caught her furtive glance as she slipped a vial from her pocket, pouring a clear liquid into his drink. "A special recipe for my favorite son-in-law," she purred, her smile as sharp as a blade. Gavin's pulse quickened, but his face remained a mask of gratitude. He wasn't meant to see that trembling hand, that darting look of guilt. In a heartbeat, he swapped his glass with Richard's, his father-in-law, whose every word dripped with disdain for Gavin's artsy career. 45 minutes later, Richard clutched his stomach, his face ashen, stumbling to the bathroom as the room spun into chaos. Susan's eyes locked onto Gavin's, wide with horror, knowing he'd unraveled her plan. This wasn't a mistake. It was betrayal, cold and calculated, aimed at the man her daughter dared to love. As whispers of food poisoning filled the air, Gavin's mind raced. Why would a mother poison her daughter's husband? Was it to humiliate him, to drive a wedge between him and Emma, or something darker? He pocketed the tampered glass, his heart heavy with a vow he'd made to his late father, to protect those he loved, no matter the cost. If you're gripped by this tale of deception, hit that subscribe button to join our journey through stories that uncover the raw truth of human hearts. One thing was certain, Gavin wouldn't let this slide. But how do you fight a family that smiles while slipping poison into your glass? Gavin Brooks stood on a windswept ridge in Boulder, Colorado, his camera capturing the Rockies' jagged peaks bathed in dawn's golden light. At 32, with tousled brown hair and eyes that saw beauty where others saw only stone, he was a man who lived for moments like these. A freelance photographer, Gavin had clawed his way from obscurity to prestige, his lens immortalizing everything from tearful wedding vows to elusive mountain lions for National Geographic. His studio, a cluttered loft in downtown Boulder, was a testament to his hustle, walls lined with framed prints, a battered desk buried under contracts. Photography wasn't just a job. It was his defiance against a world that demanded he trade passion for a paycheck. Yet, to his in-laws Susan and Richard, he was a dreamer who'd never measure up. Raised in a modest Oregon town, Gavin learned resilience from his parents, a schoolteacher mother and a carpenter father who carved hope into every piece of wood. "Live true to yourself, son," his father had said before cancer took him. That promise anchored Gavin through lean years when he slept in his van to chase shots across the West. 6 years ago, at a Denver gallery showcasing his work, he met Emma, a radiant environmental scientist with a laugh that felt like home. Their connection was instant, forged over shared dreams of preserving the wild. Emma, finishing her master's, saw in Gavin's photos a love for the world she fought to protect. They married within a year, promising to build a life unbound by convention. But Emma's parents were a storm cloud over their joy. Susan, with her polished smile and country club charm, ran Boulder's social scene like a queen. Richard, a steely investment banker, measured worth in stock portfolios and square footage. From their first meeting, they made their disapproval clear. "Photography? That's a hobby, not a career," Richard scoffed at a family barbecue, his bourbon glass glinting. Susan was subtler, praising Gavin's cute little pictures, while asking when he'd settle down with a real job. Every Sunday dinner at their colonial-style mansion was a gauntlet. Emma's hand would find Gavin's under the table, her squeeze a silent apology as Richard grilled him about finances, or Susan sighed over Emma's wasted potential with a creative type. Gavin tried to win them over. He brought rare wines, shared news of high-profile clients, even gifted Susan a framed print of Boulder's flatirons. Nothing softened their disdain. He overheard Susan on the phone last Christmas, her voice dripping with regret. Emma could have had David, the surgeon, real money, but she picked the artist. The word artist landed like a slur. Richard was blunter. When Gavin and Emma announced they were trying for a baby, he pulled Gavin aside. "Kids cost money, son. Maybe get a desk job before you drag her into that." Each jab cut deeper, but Gavin swallowed his anger. He didn't want Emma torn between him and her parents. So he smiled, shook Richard's hand, and buried the hurt. Yet the signs were there, gnawing at him. Susan would interrupt when Gavin spoke of his successes, steering Emma to the kitchen. Family photos mysteriously excluded him. Richard once suggested Emma needed therapy for her impulsive choices. His eyes fixed on Gavin. The slights piled up, each one a brick in a wall between Gavin and the family he'd hoped to join. He clung to his father's words, vowing to protect Emma and their future, but doubt crept in. What if Susan and Richard were right? What if he wasn't enough for her? If stories of courage against betrayal resonate with you, subscribe now to dive deeper into lives reshaped by truth. The Friday of Susan's birthday dinner, fresh off a grueling shoot in Montana, Gavin felt a knot in his gut. He should have listened. It wasn't just another evening of veiled insults. It was the night everything would unravel. The dining room of Susan and Richard's Boulder mansion hummed with clinking glasses and forced laughter. But Gavin Brooks felt the air grow heavy. Exhausted from a week tracking bison through Montana's snow, he nursed a beer, counting the minutes until he and Emma could escape. Susan, radiant in a silk dress, orchestrated the evening with the precision of a conductor. Her birthday dinner a showcase of wealth and control. Richard droned about a recent deal, barely glancing at Gavin, who sat quietly, his wind-burned cheeks still raw from the wild. Emma's hand brushed his, her warmth a lifeline amidst the chill of her parents' disdain. Then Susan announced her famous sangria for dessert. Her voice too bright, her smile too sharp. She vanished into the kitchen, and Gavin, ever the dutiful son-in-law, rose to help. He should have trusted the knot in his gut. Through the kitchen door's sliver, he saw Susan, her back to him, separating two glasses from the tray. Her movements were furtive, practiced. From her pocket, she drew a small vial, its contents clear as water, and poured it into one glass. The liquid dissolved instantly, leaving a faint, oily sheen. Her hands trembled, her eyes darted to the doorway, and when she heard Gavin's footsteps, she spun, shoving the vial away. "Oh, Gavin!" she chirped, her voice cracking. "I've got this. This one's for you. Special recipe for my favorite son-in-law." Her smile was a mask, but her pupils betrayed her, wide with something like fear. Gavin's heart thudded, but he mirrored her warmth, taking the glass. "Thanks, Mom," he said, his voice steady as stone. The sangria's surface caught the light, that unnatural film glinting like a warning. Back in the dining room, Richard scrolled through his phone, oblivious. Gavin's mind raced. What was in the glass? Why him? Years of slights flashed. Susan's sighs, Richard's barbs, the family photos he was accidentally cut from. This wasn't a prank. It was malice distilled into a single act. He set the tampered glass before Richard. "Sangria, sir," he said, his tone neutral. Richard grunted, not looking up. Gavin slid into his seat, claiming he preferred water with dessert, his eyes never leaving the glass. Emma chatted with Claire, unaware, while Susan watched from across the table, her fingers tight around her napkin. 45 minutes later, the room shattered. Richard's face drained of color, sweat beading on his brow. He lurched from his chair, a hand pressed to his stomach, and staggered to the bathroom. The sounds of violent retching echoed through the house. Emma gasped, rushing to check on him. Susan froze, her gaze snapping to Gavin. In that fleeting moment, their eyes locked, hers wild with panic, his cold with certainty. She knew he'd swapped the glasses. He knew she'd meant to harm him. The realization sank into him like a blade, not hot with rage but icy with resolve. This was no accident. Susan had crossed a line he hadn't imagined possible. Chaos erupted. Noah called for a doctor. Claire fetched towels, and Susan stammered about bad shellfish. Gavin sat still, eating his chocolate cake, each bite mechanical. His mind churned. Was it poison? A sedative? Why risk it at her own table? Her fear suggested this wasn't her first time. Those trembling hands, that practiced motion. He thought of Emma, her trust in her mother, and his chest tightened. He couldn't tell her, not yet, not without proof. As guests fretted, Gavin slipped the untouched glass, his glass, into his coat pocket, its weight a promise. He wouldn't confront Susan now. He wouldn't scream or accuse. He'd be smarter, quieter, deadlier. If you're hooked on stories where truth battles deception, subscribe to our channel for more raw, human dramas. His father's words echoed, "Protect those you love, son." That was his mission now, and he'd see it through. Gavin drove home with Emma, her worry for her father filling the silence. He nodded, murmured reassurances, but his thoughts were elsewhere. Susan's face haunted him, her panic, her guilt. This wasn't just about him. It was about Emma, their future, the life they were building. He glanced at his wife, her profile soft in the dashboard's glow, and felt a pang. What else had Susan done? What else was she capable of? In bed that night, he lay awake, the glass hidden in his safe. He didn't know what came next, but one truth burned clear. He'd underestimated his enemies, and they'd underestimated him. The morning after Susan's birthday dinner, Gavin Brooks sat alone in his Boulder studio, the tampered glass of sangria locked in a safe. Its faint, oily sheen haunted him, a silent accusation of betrayal. He wasn't a detective, but as a photographer, he knew how to see what others missed. The subtle shift of light, the truth hidden in shadows. That skill was his weapon now. Susan's trembling hands, her panicked glance when Richard fell ill, told him this wasn't a spontaneous act. It was planned, and Gavin needed answers. His father's voice echoed, "Protect those you love, son." That vow, his mission, drove him to act, not with fury, but with the cold precision of a man who'd spent years framing the perfect shot. He started with the glass. Driving to Denver, Gavin met Alex, a former client who ran a toxicology lab. "Personal matter," Gavin said, handing over the sealed container. Alex raised an eyebrow but promised results. 3 days later, the call came. "Benzodiazepines," Alex said. "Not lethal, but enough to knock someone out for hours, maybe blur their memory." "Where'd you get this?" Gavin thanked him, requesting a written report, and hung up. His stomach churned. Susan hadn't meant to kill him. She'd meant to humiliate him, to make him seem unreliable, perhaps to miss the gallery opening he'd been planning for months. But why? And how did she get the drugs? Gavin's next move was to dig into Susan's life. Using public records and a friend's access to medical databases, he uncovered her prescriptions. Xanax, prescribed by 3 different doctors, doses far beyond normal. She wasn't just anxious, she was stockpiling. His mind flashed to her jittery demeanor at dinners, the way she'd clutch her wine glass when he spoke of his work. He scoured local social media groups, finding buried gossip. Susan accused of stealing jewelry at her country club, a strange outburst at a neighbor's gala. The posts were old, quickly suppressed, but they painted a woman unraveling, desperate to maintain her perfect facade. Gavin's hands shook as he saved screenshots. This wasn't just about him. Susan was dangerous. Late that night, a package arrived at his studio, no return address. Inside was a USB drive and a note. "You should see this. Claire." Gavin's pulse quickened. Claire, Noah's wife, had always seemed reserved, her smile strained at family gatherings. He plugged in the drive, and his screen lit up with security footage from Susan and Richard's mansion. The timestamp showed the night of the dinner. There was Susan in the kitchen, vial in hand, pouring the liquid into his glass. Her movements were deliberate, practiced. Then Gavin entered, taking the glasses. The next clip showed Richard drinking, collapsing, and Susan's face, pale, frantic, as she realized the mistake. But the final clip chilled him. After the guests left, Susan screamed at Richard, "That was meant for Gavin. You ruined it." Richard's voice was low, weary. "This isn't the first time you've pulled something like this, Susan." Gavin paused the video, his breath shallow. Not the first time. What else had she done? He remembered Susan's cold dismissal when he'd landed a National Geographic contract. Her insistence that Emma deserved better. The footage suggested a pattern, a willingness to sabotage anyone who didn't fit her vision. He thought of Emma, her trust in her mother, and a wave of dread hit him. How many others had Susan targeted? If you're riveted by this descent into betrayal, subscribe to our channel for more stories that peel back the masks we wear. Gavin replayed the footage, zooming in on Susan's face. The fear in her eyes wasn't just guilt. It was the terror of being caught. He saved the files to an encrypted drive, knowing this was only the beginning. Susan's betrayal ran deeper than one glass of sangria, and he'd expose every layer, no matter the cost. Gavin Brooks hunched over his laptop in the dim glow of his Boulder studio, the security footage from Claire still burning in his mind. Susan's words, "This isn't the first time," echoed like a warning shot. If she'd done this before, who else had she hurt? His photographer's eye, trained to catch fleeting truths, now hunted for answers in a web of lies. He thought of Emma, her blind trust in her mother, and his chest tightened. His father's dying wish, "Live true, protect your own," pushed him forward. He couldn't stop, not when Susan and Richard's betrayal threatened everything he loved. Gavin's investigation deepened. He remembered Susan's phone call about David, the surgeon, a name dropped like a taunt. Tracking David down on LinkedIn, Gavin sent a cautious message, explaining the sangria incident without revealing too much. David replied warily, agreeing to a call. "I loved Emma," he said, his voice heavy. "But her parents, they destroyed us." He sent Gavin old emails, loving exchanges with Emma, then messages planted by Susan, falsely suggesting David's infidelity. Richard had even met David's boss, hinting at character concerns that cost him a promotion. "They convinced Emma I was a liar," David said. "I tried to fight, but she broke it off. They won." Gavin's jaw clenched. This wasn't just sabotage. It was a campaign to control Emma's life. He dug further, contacting Emma's college friend, Sarah, through a mutual connection. Sarah hesitated but shared a story. Emma's high school boyfriend, Mark, had been driven away after Susan spread rumors about his family's finances. Another friend, Lisa, revealed Emma's confidant from grad school was cut off after Susan deemed her too independent. Each revelation was a gut punch. Gavin recalled Susan's icy smile when he landed a big contract, her insistence that Emma deserved stability. It wasn't about him, it was about anyone who dared pull Emma from their grip. Claire's role grew critical. Over coffee, away from Noah's prying ears, she opened up. "They did it to me too," she whispered, her eyes glassy. "When I married Noah, Susan spread lies that I was after his money. She called my boss, said I was unreliable. I lost my job at the museum." Gavin's blood ran cold. This was the second escalation, a pattern of destruction stretching beyond Emma. Susan hadn't just targeted romantic partners. She'd crushed anyone threatening her family's image. Claire handed him another USB, this one with footage of Susan and Richard plotting in their study. "Once Gavin's gone," Susan said, "Emma will come home, run the foundation, meet the right men." Richard nodded. "She always comes back to us." Gavin watched the clip 3 times, each word a dagger. He remembered Emma's tears after a recent dinner, her confusion when Susan hinted their marriage was strained. Susan wasn't just poisoning his drink. She was poisoning Emma's mind, planting doubts to tear them apart. The pain hit harder than the sangria ever could. He thought of their wedding day, Emma's radiant smile as they danced under the stars. Had Susan been scheming even then? His hands shook, not with rage, but with a resolve as sharp as his lens. He wouldn't let them win. Claire's courage steadied him. "I couldn't tell Noah," she admitted. "He worships his father. But I can't watch them ruin you like they tried with me." She'd risked everything to help, and Gavin vowed to honor that trust. He cross-referenced the footage with his findings, building a dossier, toxicology report, Susan's prescriptions, David's emails, Claire's testimony. Each piece was a brick in a wall of truth, but he needed more to protect Emma without breaking her heart. Lying awake, he pictured his father's weathered hands, carving wood with care. "You're enough, son," he'd said. Gavin clung to that, knowing the fight ahead would test every ounce of his strength. Gavin Brooks sat in his Boulder studio, the encrypted drive of Claire's footage glowing on his laptop screen. Susan's betrayal wasn't a single act. It was a tapestry of control, woven to strangle Emma's freedom. Confronting her now would be suicide. Susan and Richard would spin lies, paint him as the villain, and pull Emma deeper into their web. Gavin needed a plan, not of vengeance, but of truth, sharp, undeniable, and final. His father's words rang clear: "Live true, protect your own." That mission guided him as he mapped out his counterstrike, each step as deliberate as framing a perfect shot. He wouldn't play their game of screams and accusations. He'd be the shadow they never saw coming. His first move was to secure allies. He called Karen, a family law attorney who'd once hired him for a charity shoot. Over coffee in a quiet Denver cafe, he laid out the toxicology report and Claire's footage. Karen's eyes narrowed. "This is attempted poisoning, Gavin. Dangerous but tricky to prove intent without more context. You need a fortress of evidence, documents, witnesses, patterns." She agreed to advise him discreetly, suggesting he build a case that could withstand Susan's inevitable denials. "They'll fight dirty," she warned. "Be ready." Gavin nodded, his resolve hardening. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for Emma, for the family they dreamed of. Back in his studio, Gavin became a detective. He backed up every file, toxicology report, Susan's prescriptions, Claire's footage, on multiple encrypted drives, one hidden in a safe deposit box. Using a friend's tech skills, he accessed public records, confirming Susan's Xanax overuse and Richard's financial ties to Boulder's elite. Then, a twist that cut deep. Among old emails, he found a thank you note from Susan. 2 years ago, Gavin had photographed her country club's charity gala for free, spending hours to capture her in flawless light. She'd called him a gem. Yet now she'd poisoned his drink. The betrayal stung worse than the drug ever could. He saved the email, a bitter reminder of her duplicity. Gavin's investigation turned to Richard. He suspected Richard wasn't just complicit, he was a strategist. Using a burner account, Gavin hacked into a local business forum where Richard posted. One thread caught his eye. Richard discussing family issues with a colleague, hinting at helping Emma see sense about her marriage. The colleague replied, "Tough call, but you've handled worse." Gavin's blood ran cold. What else had Richard handled? He installed a tracking app on his home laptop, hoping to catch any emails Richard sent to Emma. A notification pinged. Richard had forwarded Emma an article about red flags in creative partners. The manipulation was subtle, relentless, and it made Gavin's skin crawl. He leaned back, staring at his studio's walls, lined with photos of mountains and Emma's smile. Each frame was a promise, to live authentically, to build a life with her. Susan and Richard thought they could erase him, but they'd underestimated his precision. He recalled a shoot in Yellowstone, waiting hours for a wolf to emerge from the mist. Patience was his strength, and he'd use it now. Claire's footage was gold, but he needed more. Something to prove this wasn't a one-off. He texted Claire, asking if she'd heard Susan mention other incidents. Her reply was swift. "Check the club's old security logs. Susan's had accidents before." Gavin's pulse quickened. Another layer of her deceit was peeling back, and he was ready to expose it. Gavin Brooks felt the weight of his mission like a stone in his chest. Each step of his plan a defiance of Susan and Richard's betrayal. In his Boulder studio, he pored over Claire's latest message. "Susan's been reckless before. Check her emails if you can." Claire's courage, born from her own scars at Susan's hands, was a lifeline. Gavin installed a discreet monitoring app on the family's shared cloud account, a risky move that could catch Susan or Richard's communications. Notifications soon pinged. An email from Susan to Emma, urging her to rethink priorities in her marriage. The words were soft, insidious, designed to plant doubt. Gavin's heart sank. Susan wasn't just after him. She was eroding the foundation of his life with Emma. His father's voice steadied him. "Protect your own son." He wouldn't let her win. Claire met him at a park, away from Noah's loyalty to his parents. "Susan's planning something," she whispered, handing over a thumb drive with more footage. "This is from their garage camera, after the dinner." The clip showed Susan pacing, muttering about fixing the Gavin problem. Richard's voice cut in. Just don't overplay your hand again. Gavin's jaw tightened. Again, Claire's eyes met his, heavy with shared pain. She tried to isolate me from Noah, she said. Spread lies to my friends. I can't let her do it to Emma. Gavin nodded, grateful for her defiance. He saved the footage, his plan sharpening. He'd use Susan's own arrogance against her. The trap took shape when Emma mentioned Susan's request for a photo shoot for her social media profile. She specifically asked for you, Emma said, puzzled. Gavin saw his chance, a private moment to confront Susan with evidence. He prepared meticulously, printing the toxicology report and Susan's prescription records, sealing them in an envelope. But before he could act, Susan struck first. That evening, Emma came home, her eyes red. Mom called, she said, her voice trembling. She said you were aggressive at the last dinner, that you're unstable. Is that true? Gavin's stomach dropped. The accusation was a masterstroke, turning his silence against him. He wanted to show her the footage, the report, but her doubt stopped him cold. I'd never hurt your family, he said, his voice steady but cracking inside. Emma turned away, curling up in bed, her silence louder than any scream. The rift between them grew, a chasm Susan had carved. Gavin worked late, avoiding Emma's distant gaze, each night a battle to keep his resolve. He remembered their first date, hiking Boulder's trails, Emma laughing as he photographed her against the sunset. Now her trust was slipping, and it hurt worse than any poison. Susan's lie had seeded doubt, and Gavin feared it would bloom into something he couldn't undo. He clung to his mission, knowing the truth was his only weapon. Claire texted, "Stay strong. Emma will see it. She just needs time." Gavin hoped she was right, but the ache in his chest told him time was a luxury he might not have. He refined the photo shoot trap. He'd confront Susan alone, present the envelope, and demand she confess to Richard, or face exposure. Karen reviewed his evidence, warning, "If Susan panics, she'll double down. Be ready for her to twist this on you." Gavin nodded, his mind racing. He added a backup, a tiny recorder in his camera bag to capture Susan's reaction. If she lied to Emma again, he'd have proof. The tension coiled tighter, each day a test of his patience. Emma barely spoke, her faith in him fraying under Susan's whispers. Gavin felt like a man on a cliff's edge, one wrong step from losing everything. But he'd waited out blizzards for the perfect shot before. He could wait out Susan. He had to, for Emma, for the life they'd vowed to build. Gavin Brooks stepped into Susan and Richard's Boulder mansion, his camera bag slung over one shoulder, the sealed envelope of evidence heavy in his pocket. The air was thick with Susan's perfume, her presence a performance of grace, as she greeted him for the photo shoot she'd requested. Dressed in a tailored blazer, her makeup flawless, she looked every inch the matriarch, untouchable, supreme. But Gavin saw the cracks, the slight tremor in her fingers, the way her smile faltered when their eyes met. His heart pounded, but his face was a mask of calm, his voice steady as he set up his tripod. He'd spent years capturing truth through a lens. Today, he'd expose hers. His father's words anchored him. Protect your own son. For Emma, for their future, he'd stay composed, no matter what Susan threw at him. "Richard's at the office," Susan said, her tone too casual, as she posed by the grand staircase. Gavin adjusted his camera, the tiny recorder hidden in his bag, silently capturing every word. He waited, letting her relax, her guard slipping as she chatted about her social media brand. Then, with the precision of a sniper, he struck. "Before we start," he said, his voice low, even, "you might want to see this." He slid the envelope across the polished table. Susan's smile froze, her eyes narrowing as she opened it. The toxicology report spilled out, followed by her Xanax prescriptions and screenshots of Claire's footage. Her hands shook violently, the papers rustling like dry leaves. "This is absurd," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'd never." "We both know what you did." Gavin cut in, his tone as smooth as glass, his gaze unyielding. You tried to drug me. I want to know why. Susan's face cycled through emotions. Shock, denial, rage. She laughed, a brittle sound, and tossed the papers down. You're delusional, Gavin. You think Emma will believe this nonsense over her own mother. Her bravado was crumbling. Her eyes darted to the door, as if expecting rescue. Gavin stood still, his hands clasped, betraying none of the storm inside. He thought of Emma's doubt, her tear-streaked face, and his resolve hardened. Why? He repeated, his voice a quiet blade. Susan snapped, her composure shattering. You're not good enough for her. She spat, her face flushed, veins pulsing at her temples. A photographer? You'll drag her down with your childish dreams. I just wanted you to miss that stupid gallery opening. To show Emma you're unreliable. Her voice rose, hysterical, but Gavin didn't flinch. He let her words hang, each one a confession recorded in secret. Drugging me shows Emma reliability? He asked, his calm a stark contrast to her unraveling. Susan's eyes widened, realizing her mistake, and she sank into a chair, her hands covering her face. For a moment, Gavin saw not a schemer, but a woman terrified of losing control. It didn't soften him. Here's what happens next, he said, his voice unwavering, each word measured. You tell Richard what you did. Then you both start respecting me, not because you believe in me, but because the alternative is Emma seeing these. He tapped the envelope. The footage, the prescriptions, the rumors you buried. Are you willing to lose your daughter over this? Susan's head jerked up, her eyes blazing with defiance, then dimming with defeat. She'll never choose you, she whispered, but the words lacked conviction. Gavin picked up his camera bag, untouched. If you're captivated by this battle of wits and wills, subscribe to our channel for more stories of truth triumphing over lies. Maybe not, he said, his voice steady as ever. But she'll believe the evidence. Test me, Susan, and find out. He left without taking a single photo, the recorder still running. Driving home, he felt no victory, only the weight of what came next. Susan would fight back. Her call to Emma proved she was already spinning lies. Gavin's calm was his armor, but inside, he ached. Emma's doubt lingered. A wound Susan had deepened. He pictured his father's weathered hands, carving wood with care, and clung to his mission. He'd protect Emma, even if it meant breaking her heart to save her. Susan's reaction had given him what he needed, a confession, a crack in her facade. Now he'd widen it, for Emma, for their unborn child, for the life they deserved. The air in Susan and Richard's Boulder mansion was stifling. The grand living room a stage for the confrontation Gavin Brooks had orchestrated. He stood by the fireplace, his camera tripod set up, its lens a silent witness to the reckoning. Emma sat beside Noah and Claire, her face pale, her eyes flickering between Gavin and her parents. Susan perched on a velvet sofa, her posture rigid, while Richard leaned back in an armchair, exuding the confidence of a man who'd never lost. Gavin's heart thundered, but his expression was granite, his voice steady as he began. His father's dying words, "Live true, protect your own," were his North Star. Today, he'd wield truth like a blade, carving through Susan and Richard's lies to free Emma. Every piece of evidence was a bullet, and he'd fire with precision. "I'm recording this," Gavin announced, nodding at the camera. "For the family archives." Susan's lips pursed, but she said nothing, her fingers tightening on her necklace. Richard waved a dismissive hand. "Get on with it, Gavin. What's this nonsense?" Gavin met Emma's gaze, her doubt a silent plea for answers, and began. "Susan tried to drug me at your birthday dinner," he said, his tone even factual. He slid the toxicology report across the coffee table, its stark numbers glaring. Benzodiazepines enough to incapacitate. Susan's face drained of color, her breath catching. "That's ridiculous," she snapped, but her voice wavered, her eyes darting to Richard. Gavin didn't blink. "This is the glass you gave me," he continued, pulling up a still from Claire's footage on his laptop. The screen showed Susan pouring the vial's contents, her movements unmistakable. The room froze. Emma's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Noah scoffed, "That's edited." But Claire touched his arm, her silence heavy. Susan leapt up, her composure cracking. "This is a setup. Gavin's jealous, always has been." Her voice was shrill, but Gavin remained still, his calm a stark contrast to her unraveling. He played the footage in full. Susan's furtive act, Richard's collapse, her scream after the guests left. "That was meant for Gavin." Emma gasped, tears welling, and looked at her mother. "Mom, is this true?" Susan's eyes glistened, but she doubled down, pointing at Gavin. "He's manipulating you, Emma. He's tearing our family apart." Gavin's chest ached at Emma's anguish, but he pressed on, his strategy unyielding. He'd spent weeks building this case, each piece a brick in a wall Susan couldn't climb. "You wanted me to miss my gallery opening," he said, his voice low, deliberate, "to make Emma think I'm unreliable. But it's not just me, is it?" He glanced at Claire, who nodded subtly, her courage bolstering his. Richard shifted, his confidence fraying. "Enough, Gavin," he growled. "You're out of your depth." But Gavin was just beginning. He'd layered his evidence like a trap, each reveal tightening the noose. Susan's panic was palpable, her hands trembling as she clutched the sofa's arm. Emma's gaze shifted to her, searching, and Gavin saw the first crack in her trust. A flicker of belief in him. He paused, letting the weight of the footage settle. Susan's denial was a house of cards, and he'd only played his first hand. He thought of Emma's laughter on their wedding day, her hand in his as they vowed to face the world together. Susan had tried to steal that, but Gavin wouldn't let her. His calm was his armor, his evidence his sword. He'd protect Emma, even if it meant shattering her world to save her. The room crackled with tension, every eye on him, waiting for his next move. He was ready. Gavin Brooks stood unwavering in the charged silence of Susan and Richard's bolder living room, the camera's red light a steady pulse. Emma's tear-streaked face was a knife in his heart, but he pressed on, his evidence a lifeline to pull her from her parents' lies. Susan's denials hung in the air, brittle and fraying, while Richard's steely gaze faltered. Noah's fists clenched, his loyalty to his parents a wall Gavin had to dismantle. Claire's quiet nod urged him forward. His father's voice echoed, "Protect your own, son." And Gavin leaned into his mission, wielding truth with the precision of a surgeon. He'd built this moment, layered his proof like a fortress, and now he'd tear down Susan and Richard's facade, piece by irrefutable piece. He slid a folder across the table, his movements deliberate. "This is an email from David, Emma's ex-fiancé," he said, his voice calm, cutting through Susan's lingering protests. The screen displayed David's words, detailing how Susan planted false texts to convince Emma he'd cheated. "He lost his job after Richard spread rumors," Gavin added, producing a letter from David's former boss confirming the sabotage. Emma's breath hitched, her eyes locked on the email, recognition dawning. Susan lurched forward, her face contorted. "Lies! He's fabricating this!" she cried, but her voice cracked, her hands flailing. Gavin didn't flinch, his calm a stark rebuke. "Then explain this," he said, pulling up a spreadsheet of Susan's Xanax prescriptions. 3 doctors, overlapping doses, enough to supply a pharmacy. "You planned it, Susan, just like you planned to ruin David." Noah sprang up, his face red. "This is bullshit, Gavin. You edited those videos, faked these emails." His voice shook, but Claire grabbed his wrist. "Noah, listen," she said, her tone firm. "They did it to me too. Susan spread lies to get me fired from the museum. I showed Gavin the footage." Noah's eyes widened, betrayal flickering. Susan rounded on Claire, her voice venomous. "You ungrateful girl. After all we've done for you." But Claire stood her ground, her pain a mirror to Gavin's. "You tried to break us, Susan. You failed." The room reeled, Emma's gaze darting between her mother and Claire, her world fracturing. Gavin pressed his advantage, his strategy relentless. He displayed texts from Emma's old friends, Sarah, Lisa, confirming Susan's role in isolating them. "This isn't just about me," he said, his voice steady but laced with sorrow. "It's a pattern. Anyone who helped Emma be herself, you pushed out." He played another clip from Claire's footage. Susan in the study, plotting to bring Emma home after Gavin's gone. Richard's voice agreed. "She'll run the foundation, meet proper men." Emma's sob broke the silence, her hands covering her face. "Mom, Dad, how could you?" she whispered. Susan's eyes glistened, but she pivoted, her voice low, dangerous. "Gavin's the liar, Emma. He's twisting everything to tear us apart. Don't let him ruin our family." The accusation landed like a blow, and Gavin felt Emma's gaze waver, her doubt a chasm threatening to swallow him. He stood still, his hands clasped, betraying none of the fear clawing inside. He'd anticipated this, Susan's desperation, her knack for manipulation. But he'd saved his strongest card. He thought of their first hike, Emma's laughter echoing through Boulder's canyons, and steeled himself. "I'm not done," he said, his voice a quiet thunder. He queued up the next piece of evidence, his fingers steady on the laptop. Susan's face paled, sensing the noose tightening. Richard leaned forward, his confidence crumbling. Noah sank back, his anger giving way to doubt. Claire's eyes met Gavin's, a silent vow of support. The room held its breath, poised on the edge of collapse, as Gavin prepared to deliver the final blow. Gavin Brooks felt the room pulse with raw tension. Susan's accusation, "He's tearing us apart," still ringing in the Boulder Mansion's living room. Emma's tearful eyes searched his, teetering on the edge of belief, while Noah's doubt hung heavy. Claire's steady gaze anchored him, a reminder of their shared fight. Susan sat rigid, her face a mask of defiance, but her trembling hands betrayed her. Richard's jaw tightened, his empire of control cracking. Gavin stood calm, his heart racing but his voice a steady anchor. His father's words, "Live true, protect your own," burned bright. He'd saved his deadliest weapon for last, a final strike to shatter Susan and Richard's lies. With surgical precision, he pressed play on his laptop, unleashing the truth. "This is from our photo shoot," Gavin said, his tone even, eyes locked on Susan. The speakers crackled. Then Susan's voice filled the room, hysterical, unmistakable. "You're not good enough for her. I just wanted you to miss that stupid gallery opening. To show Emma you're unreliable." The confession, recorded in secret, was a thunderbolt. Susan gasped, her hands flying to her mouth, her eyes wild with panic. That's not me," she stammered. But her voice matched perfectly, each word a nail in her coffin. Emma's sob broke the silence, her face crumpling as she stared at her mother. "You admitted it," she whispered, her voice raw. "You tried to hurt him." Susan lunged forward, desperate. "Emma, he tricked me. He's twisting my words." But the lie collapsed under the weight of her own voice. Gavin remained still, his calm a fortress against Susan's unraveling. He'd orchestrated this moment, every piece of evidence. Toxicology report, footage, emails, now the recording, laid out to leave no escape. Richard's face darkened, his hands gripping the armchair. "Enough, Gavin," he growled, but his authority was gone, his voice hollow. Noah shook his head, his anger fading into disbelief. "Mom, Dad, how could you?" he muttered. Claire squeezed his hand, her eyes glistening. "They did it to us too, Noah," she said softly. "They tried to control everything." Noah's shoulders slumped, the truth sinking in. Susan's tears fell, not from remorse but from the realization she'd lost her grip. "You don't understand," she choked, her voice breaking. "I was protecting our family." Gavin's gaze didn't waver, his mission clear. He thought of Emma's laughter, their dreams of a child, and the poison Susan had poured to destroy it. "Protecting your family?" he said, his voice low, cutting. "You poisoned your daughter's husband. You sabotaged her past, her friends, her choices. This ends now. He turned to Emma, his eyes softening. I have everything, footage, emails, testimonies. I won't share it because that would hurt you. But if they ever interfere again, it goes to their club, their partners, their world. Susan's face crumpled, her defiance gone. Richard stared at the floor, his empire reduced to ash. For the first time, Gavin saw fear in his eyes. Not of scandal, but of losing Emma. Emma stood, her voice trembling but firm. I love you both, but this is unforgivable. You don't control me anymore. Noah rose beside her, his voice steady. We're done being your pawns. Susan's sobs grew louder, her hands covering her face, while Richard sat frozen, a king dethroned. Gavin packed his laptop, his movements deliberate, his calm unshaken. He'd fulfilled his father's charge, protecting Emma not with rage but with truth. As he shouldered his camera bag, he met Emma's eyes, seeing pain but also resolve. She believed him, and that was enough. The room fell silent, the weight of their fractured family settling like dust. Gavin had won, not by destroying them, but by setting Emma free. 6 months after the confrontation that shattered Susan and Richard's control, Gavin Brooks stood on the porch of their Boulder home, the Rockies glowing under a summer sunset. Emma cradled their newborn daughter, Lily, her tiny fingers curling around Gavin's thumb. The air was warm, scented with pine, and for the first time in years, Gavin felt unburdened. The scars of Susan's betrayal lingered, but they'd built something stronger. A family rooted in truth, not manipulation. His father's words, "Live true, protect your own," had guided him through the storm, and now they anchored him in this quiet victory. He'd fought not to destroy, but to create, and the life before him was proof he'd won. The aftermath of that night had been raw. Emma, shaken by her parents' deceit, leaned on Gavin, her trust in him reborn but fragile. They moved forward deliberately, setting boundaries like sentinels. Susan and Richard retreated, their texts brief, their visits rare. No apologies came. Gavin hadn't expected any. Instead, a certified letter arrived from Richard's attorney, containing the deed to their rented house and a trust fund for Lily, clean of strings. It wasn't remorse, but surrender, a silent acknowledgement that Gavin had outmaneuvered them. He accepted it, not for himself, but for Emma and Lily, ensuring their future was theirs alone. Gavin threw himself into his work, channeling pain into art. He opened a gallery in downtown Boulder, its walls alive with his photographs. Snow-dusted peaks, tearful brides, Emma's smile against a canyon's glow. The grand opening was a triumph, friends and clients filling the space, his parents flying in from Oregon to beam with pride. Susan and Richard attended briefly, their presence a test. Susan held Lily under Emma's watchful eye, her touch hesitant, her smile strained. Richard shook Gavin's hand, nodding at the photos with genuine approval, but offered no advice, no control. They left early and Gavin felt a weight lift. They hadn't changed, but they'd learned. He was no longer their pawn. Emma and Noah began therapy, unraveling the damage of their parents' manipulation. Emma confided in Gavin one night, her voice soft as she rocked Lily. I used to think pleasing them was everything, she said, her eyes on their daughter. Now I know it's about us, this. Gavin kissed her forehead, his heart full. Noah, too, was healing, Claire's courage helping him see his parents' flaws. The siblings grew closer, their bond a quiet rebellion against Susan and Richard's legacy. Life settled into a new rhythm. Gavin and Emma hiked Boulder's trails with Lily strapped to his chest, her coos echoing where they'd once dreamed of a family. They laughed more, loved deeper, their home a sanctuary from the past. Susan and Richard invited them for Christmas, promising a fresh start. Emma wanted to go, but Gavin insisted on conditions. A hotel stay, freedom to leave, no unsupervised time with Lily. Emma agreed, her strength a mirror of his. The dinner was civil, Susan's feast lavish, Richard's charm polished. But when Richard offered Gavin a job at his firm, a real future, he called it, Gavin declined, his voice firm. I'm happy where I am, he said, his hand finding Emma's. Susan's smile faltered, but she said nothing. They'd lost their power and they knew it. A letter from Claire arrived one winter evening, tucked into a package with a photo of her and Noah smiling. "Gavin," she wrote, "you gave me the strength to speak my truth. Noah's listening now, and we're rebuilding. Thank you for showing us what family can be." Gavin folded the letter, his throat tight. Claire's words were a gift, a reminder that his fight had rippled beyond his own home. He thought of Susan's vial, her cold ambition, and how close he'd come to losing everything. But he hadn't. He'd stood firm, not with fists but with evidence, patience, and love. Spring brought new beginnings. Gavin's gallery thrived, his photos featured in a national magazine. Emma returned to her environmental work, her passion reignited. Lily grew, her giggles filling their home with light. One evening, as they sat on the porch, the stars igniting over the mountains, Emma leaned against Gavin, Lily asleep upstairs. "They'll never change, will they?" she asked, her voice soft. "No," Gavin replied, honest but gentle. "But we have." She squeezed his hand, and he felt the truth of it. Their life, their love was theirs alone. Gavin realized then that his victory wasn't in toppling Susan and Richard, but in refusing their game. He hadn't schemed or manipulated. He'd lived authentically, protecting Emma with quiet strength. His gallery, his family, his art. They were his defiance, proof that success wasn't their approval, but the life he'd built on his terms. As the mountains stood sentinel, unchanging yet eternal, Gavin held Emma close, their daughter's future safe in their hands. The sweetest revenge was this: a life well lived, unshackled from their chains, with love as his legacy.